So Erin, thank you so much for being part of our podcast. We got to speak with your amazing wife, Leela, recently, and it's fun to have you join us as well.
Thank you. It's really nice to be here. Yeah.
And one of the things that we learned in our conversation with Leela is that you started off your life as a practitioner doing a lot of work with couples. And we wondered if you'd be open to sharing how that came about and what that was like for you.
Well, I'd love to do that. So one of the things that fascinates me about this understanding of the mind is how it applies to everything. And I've kind of, throughout my, years working in it, I've seen that. So when I started, it was at Pransky and Associates, which at the time, most of the work was with couples. And funnily enough, it was a intensive I sat in with on a couple that got me even interested in it. So I'd been visiting George and Linda for a number of years because they're really lovely to be with, and they're such a lovely area of the world. And they had, people who might have heard me say this before, but they would put me in trainings and did nothing for me, nothing for me whatsoever. I thought it was all silly. But George had asked me to do some research for him, and I'd insisted that I would sit in with him. And we sat in with this couple. And what I saw with this couple is what we did in our relationship work, which was revolutionary, absolutely revolutionary. And it was so effective in such a short space of time that the local hotel thought we were sex therapists.
That's hilarious.
Yeah, so couples would turn up, clearly put off with each other, not wanting to have any time together, check into separate rooms at opposite ends of the hotel, meet in the lobby and come to our office. And after 2 or 3 days, they'd be chit-chatting, holding hands. They'd have cancelled one of their rooms. They'd be sitting in the lounge, having drinks together. So in our world, having a wonderful relationship after the first few months is not seen as an expected outcome. But yet this was happening to almost all the clients that we saw. So the hotel's like, they must be sex therapists. That's the only thing that can make people that happy. that it must be. And I didn't know it was possible, and I didn't know how it worked. So in my life, I wanted a relationship, but I just couldn't get them to work. I just could not get them to work. And it's funny now, but the harder I tried, the more of a mess it became more quickly. So just to give you a sense of kind of how that work operated. So I sat in with George with this couple. They'd had the woman in the relationship had had an affair. She felt a bit guilty, but felt trapped by her husband's desperation to keep her in the marriage. He was kind of needy, but resentful, but desperate, but insecure and upset. They really weren't in a good place together. And the first meeting we sat down on, they laid all this out. They laid out their problems, like, here's what's wrong and here's what needs fixing. And here's why I'm so unhappy. And I was sitting there with the normal model of relationship counseling, which is they're unhappy, they have these problems. You're the professional, George, get to work, fix these problems, show them how to fix these problems, give them approaches, like, help these people, for God's sakes. And in my mind, it went through my mind, oh, he just needs to see this and she just needs to see that. So, other people's problems are easy. So George doesn't say anything about anything that they've said. He doesn't talk about how they feel. He doesn't talk about what they could do. He doesn't even talk about the issues at all, And the first 15 minutes, I was like, okay, maybe he's backing into it. Maybe he's edging into it. And when it became obvious that, to me, he was talking general, unrelated mumbo jumbo, I I just kind of tuned out. I was like, when you get to the point, wake me. And on the third day, this couple comes in looking like they've been on a 7-week vacation.
Wow.
They're clear-minded, they're clear-faced, they look fantastic. They're really at ease with each other. They're holding hands, they're swinging their hands together. And that woke me up. I'm like, whoa, what happened? What happened here? So they sit down and George is pretty pleased, George is like, oh, tell me what's going on, And I swear to God, he says exactly what I was thinking on the first day. Word, or not word for word, but 50-60% of the words. Oh, I just realized I want her to be happy. And actually, I'd love her to be happy with me. But if she's not, then I want her to go be happy. I'll be fine. And then she does the same. She says pretty much what was clear to me on the first day in not such a different way. That kind of blew my mind, because here were two people that didn't know what to do. They were so upset and stumped. They flew all the way across the United States of America. I know for a fact nobody helped them. Nobody told them. Nobody worked with them. Nobody worked it through with them. And here they are with the answer.
Mm-hmm.
And it's not even a problem anymore. I could not. That was a break in reality for me, because up until that point, I was judging what George and Linda were saying, thinking what I was thinking was better and what they were thinking was silly. But it was absolutely undeniably true that I saw something happen I couldn't explain. I just could not explain it. And when I think I must have sat through the rest of the meeting like that. And then walked outside like that. And then George was like, well, what do you think? And I was like, that was amazing. They didn't know and nobody told them, and then they knew. And in that moment, I kind of became a student of what they were doing. And what happened in that couples intensive is basically how relationships work. It's that when people have clarity and well-being, when they're in their right mind, the symptoms are that they roll with things. They're not sensitive. They don't get easily bothered. And when they do, they get easily over it. And they have a natural appreciation and goodwill and love and connection. And you have a very rich experience, right? So, like I happened to be at the gym the other day with a trainer, and my mind was really free. And it was just a wonderful hour. I felt like we had a really nice time together. I was busting my guts out, but I mean, it was a really rich experience. And then there are times where I don't even notice him because I'm so wrapped up in my thinking about what I'm doing and all of that. And what George and Linda were working with is that people's experience of their relationship is a symptom of their level of clarity, depth of mind, purity of mind, sanity of thought. And that's indicated by your emotions. So rather than seeing people's upset as a symptom of their problems, with the assumption if you solve the problems, they're going to feel better, they were looking at people's upset as a symptom of how disturbed and distorted their mind was.
Mm-hmm.
So all they did, which is why I didn't think it was to do with the problem, but George talked about the problem the whole time. But because I wasn't aware that it was a problem, it sounded irrelevant to me.
Mm-hmm.
And that problem was, you're in no fit state to be listening to yourself. Do you know that? Why are you blaming on them? Your mind is upsetting you. You're no fit state to take yourself seriously. Do you know that? And what's fascinating is, as soon as couples wake up to that, all of a sudden they start taking their own upset and disturbed feelings and perceptions less personally, because it's just a fluctuation of thought. But more importantly, they stop being informed by them. They stop living their relationship accordingly. And even more importantly, they stop blaming it on the other person. And as soon as that stops, there's nothing to stop them taking their disturbed perceptions lightly, feeling better, and having a fabulous relationship. So what the basic assumption is, everybody gets upset. When they get upset, they hate their partner. When they feel better, they love their partner. When they feel better, they have perspective, so they don't really have troubling problems. When they're upset, they're sensitive and they can't think straight, so they have troubling problems. Either you see that as a symptom of your mind and you navigate it that way, or you blame it on your life and relationship, and then you're going to need some help. And you're going to torture yourself with your own thinking in the name of the fact that it's someone else's fault or something else's fault. And there wasn't a single relationship that didn't apply that way to. I even had a client, right, that called up and said, I need help. I can't stand my husband, right? Which is, we all have that experience. And I said, well, I gave him my normal rap. Which is,
it wasn't Rohini, was it?
I gave this lady my normal rap, which is, well, there must have been a time when you first got together where you liked each other. And she says, no, there wasn't. There wasn't. I've always hated him. I was like, well, why did you get married? So she said, well, I was religious and he was a great pick on paper. And I had my heart set on getting married to someone that fit the criteria, but I couldn't be around him. It just made my skin crawl. So in order to go through with the marriage, I went abroad for the engagement. She said, can you help? I said, well, I don't really know. The only thing I know is that he annoys you. And that tells me that you're not in a clear mind around him. And I know that if you're in a clear mind around him, you'd have goodwill and you'd appreciate him. So I know for a fact, you could be less reactive and more appreciative and have more goodwill. I know that for a fact. And that's you listening to your distorted thinking. So she said, well, if that happens, will I fall in love with him? I said, well, I don't know that. I mean, I have no idea. So she said, well, if there's anything that might help, I'm up for it. So she came to do an intensive like the couple that you work with, which was basically about stop blaming your judgmental thinking on him. And if you stop doing that, he's not going to be so annoying. Okay. And then all the reasons why she had that thinking came out, which are not really relevant, but it was useful for her to see, oh, I made that up. I had my own values. I had my own judgments and all that. So at the end of the 4 days, she says, I can really see that there's nothing to stop me feeling good about him. Why would I be irritated around him for more than the moment it takes for that thought to go through my head? But I can't imagine I'll actively look forward to seeing him. I said, well, who knows what's possible in a clearer mind? We just, we get the dark spots out the way, and then we'll see what happens. So it was funny because weeks later she called up. She said, yeah, I was cleaning and I started to look forward to him coming home.
Wow.
And what blew my mind about that is that they stayed together and had a happy relationship and had kids and weren't just like most relationship counseling is like, well, let's allow you to make it work so it's not dysfunctional and unbearable. Actually, because what we know about where love and appreciation comes from and what gets in the way is just thought, there's no reason you can't have a very rich relationship if you take accountability and look past your own thinking.
That's beautiful. And that's really pointing to how, love is the natural state. And what gets in the way of it is us identifying with all of the thinking that isn't our natural state, which is our conditioned state. What a great example.
Totally.
Yeah, it's so awesome. I'm also thinking about what you said about your experience in Lakona at that point in time, where all of this was kind of sort of unfolding in a way that was probably completely outside of any reference point that you had.
Yeah.
In terms of, how are they getting from point A to point B? And all that I can see is George is just sort of indulging this sort of light banter. I don't know how you would describe it. And I know that in my experience with George, it was so much emphasis was put on rapport And so I now see and understand and value that, and I think it's kind of funny for me, because in the work that I do at the treatment center, certainly during this period of COVID, a lot of the sessions were outside, and there are people there who are not well versed in this understanding. So they're kind of, there are texts sort of floating around. And I'm kind of, I think it's funny because there are those moments when they're probably passing by the conversation that I'm having with a resident, and I'm probably talking about what they did on holiday or something completely unrelated to what they probably think that I should be talking about. But we're having a ball, we're having fun. And then I guess, I guess I learned this from George, is that, you create rapport, and then you sort of subtly sort of weave in the principles, and then you hopefully get some traction and get some leverage there. But I love the idea that you were kind of there and like, what the hell is going on? And yet there was this incredible shift in this client. What a beautiful story.
Yeah. But it just shows you one of the things I've learned from that recently, Angus, is we all have so many assumptions about reality that stop us appreciating something new we might learn. So I must have sat in on 7 trainings with George, Linda, Judy Sedgman, Dickon Bettinger, Sandy Crott, Keith Blev, all these people. And what I heard was, that's ridiculous. That's ridiculous. That's ridiculous. And once I started getting interested in what they were saying, or when I took it seriously, I hadn't heard anything. So if you'd stopped and said to me, well, what's ridiculous, Aaron? I'll say that. What did they say? I'm like, I don't know. It was just ridiculous. Because it didn't fit my assumptions about reality. So we see we're limited by what we think we know. And there's nowhere more in relationships. There are so many assumptions about relationships that you're not going to be happy forever. It can't go deeper. If it happens to be great long term, you're one of the lucky few. And it's in jokes, and it's in stories, and it's in, drama. And so it stops us seeing that more natural potential that you talked about, Rohini, of like just falling in love again, and realizing, oh, it's me stopping me doing that. I'm the one that's buying into the thinking that makes it humdrum or annoying or sensitive, or like one of the things that I've realized recently, because it's gone away, is one of the main things that would get under my skin about my relationship and Leela is I was always thinking it's not fair. It's not fair. So she would say, why don't you blah blah? I think I can never say that to you, and you'd be like, oh sure, no problem, I'll sort it out. And I'd be like, that's not fair. And then I would stew in that's not fair. And it's only when I stopped doing that, I'm like, wow, that was a lot of unnecessary pain and angst of that thought, it's not fair. I mean, the same thing happens. Of course it's not fair. Like nothing's symmetrical. But yeah, it's interesting.
Yeah, and being able to see it for ourselves. I mean, I don't know if we've talked about this much in our podcast in terms of how our relationship changed. And when Angus said, was that Rohini calling you Aaron? It's not really that funny, because it could have been me calling you, because I really believed for a long time in our relationship that we weren't a good fit, that I couldn't be happy with him. And it really looked to me that his behavior was the cause of my upset. Like it just was obvious. And if he changed, I would feel happier. And talking about those concepts in reality, it's not talked about in a mainstream way, how the outside world doesn't cause our experience. It's not talked about how our relationship with our thinking is where experience comes from. And so I could get away with that for years, because many people, I talk to them and say, yeah, I can't believe you put up with that. I can't, your husband, what are you doing with him? Like it gets validated.
Who are you talking to?
I'm not going to give any names.
Who should I not be inviting to dinner?
Names. I want names.
I want names.
Yeah, right.
I believe you did the same thing.
Let's not get distracted here.
I just think it's such an important point that people don't realize that they're walking around with these assumptions about reality that aren't true, and they're living in the experience of their assumptions rather than in the experience of reality.
Totally. And so, yeah, so we look in the wrong direction. It's so true. Yeah.
Yeah. And I know your career, Erin, has gone from being in the US, working at Pransky and Associates, working, through all different levels with them, going back to London, having One Thought as your business, working with organizations. And now you also have your One Thought practitioner training program. So one of the things that I'd love to hear you talk more about is working with practitioners, because that's one of the things that I love to do as well. And it's really different, I would imagine, in terms of your training program versus what you might have seen in a traditional counseling training or traditional coach training. And so I'd love to hear more about how you approach training and developing practitioners.
Yeah, so when I moved from Pranskys and Associates to London, the principles were just starting to get popular. Mm-hmm. Lots of people wanted to train, but there weren't many people that had a lot of client experience. Mm-hmm. And one of the things that fascinated me about the principles very early on was that, I'm living the limits or the potential of my understanding, right? So, and that solved my relationship problems in a single moment. Was like, my mind's making me feel bad. If I blame it on my relationship, I get righteous and attack the relationship and ruin it. And if I don't, there's nothing to make me approach the relationship in a disturbed state. So there's nothing to mess with my relationship except me. Mm. And the only reason I would do that is that I mistake a thought, a perturbed, impulsive thought, for a reality. And I'm wise to that, well, not as wise as I thought I was at the time, but wise enough not to do it for weeks on end. So, and that idea that I'm living in the ripples of the thought that I'm having, and the thought that I'm having that determines how dysfunctional or insightful my view of anything is. And I've approached, for the most part, I just approach life and work as if that's the only thing you need to know. It's the only thing you need to know. What if that's the only thing you need to know? And you get insecure and you think, but I might need this and I might need that. And what about this? But if you treat that like what it is, that's insecure thought, that's never very informative. And then you get a clearer thought. It's true. You always. So that's been my orientation for practitioners, is, do they know that's all they need? Like, do they know that their feedback system is telling them about their relationship to a purer spiritual intelligence, or to the misleading vagaries of their own thinking? Do they know that? Is that an orientation in their work or not? So what's really interesting about training practitioners is everybody's preoccupied by what they should be doing and what they shouldn't be doing. And that is just totally irrelevant. Because if you're considering that there's a universal, infinite, pure spiritual intelligence at play, that's all you need. Mm. That if you got a good signal, you're good. And if you got a bad signal, you're not, and really seeing that as a foundation. And I think once people see that as a foundation, every time they get stumped, they'll learn. Every time they make a mistake, they'll learn, because they're going back to the real blueprint. Mm. They're going back to the blueprint. So you're always learning. And it's so organic when you get stuck, or you make a mistake, or you're out of your depth. And then you go back to the principles as a blueprint. Then you spring forward because you learn what you didn't see at the time, which is why you stumbled, or, got, intense, or whatever it happened to be. And there's something very organic. So it's all just learning. Like, life is a feedback system for learning. Work with clients is a feedback system for learning. And the challenge for practitioners is they've grown up in a world that believes in skills, knowledge, approaches, behaviors, tactics, strategies, and those are completely limiting and unhelpful and empty vessels when it comes to anything, really, I think, because like we work with businesses, and when the state of mind changes, the same business with the same people, the same strategy, the same technology, the same hours in the day, the same budget starts just flying. Like their revenues go up, their attrition goes down, everything changes. So this is vital unseen dimension that's driving everything. And practitioners, that's your reality. And it's just getting a sense of when you step out of that reality and you start explaining things other ways. That's what you got to be hip to, and then so you can come back. And so it is very different to other approaches. And sometimes when we have therapists on our course, they're like, wondering when we were going to start the training.
They're like you in that session with George.
Yes, seriously. They're like, I think I'm on the wrong course. But what happens is, as they start to settle down and understand it better, the best comment of this was like, when I joined this course, I was wondering, how do you talk about the principles? How do you introduce them? Now that I see them everywhere and I see them in such a more fundamental, I don't know how I couldn't. And that's the shift you're looking for with a practitioner training. And the challenge is, it must be like 10 to 20% of people that come in looking for that. So people are not looking for what they need. So when they join the program, I'm like, now look, this is how it works. It's a deeper understanding that you're looking for. Yeah, no problem. What do you do if this happens? What do you do if that happens?
And that's how, like you said at the beginning, this applies everywhere, because it's always at play that everybody, whether they think they have an issue with a relationship, whether they think they have a problem with their boss, whether they think they have an issue with money, they're all up against their state of mind and thinking. Yeah. And yes, there are realities happening, that they have a boss, they have a certain number in their bank account, but that isn't the thing that's causing the suffering. Yeah. And people really don't see that.
I know. And it's the same as the relationship thing, Rohini. It's like the reality you see and feel when you look at your bank account tells you what your state of mind is. It doesn't tell you anything else. And people get confused because they're like, oh, that tells me I've got money problems or relationship problems. And then you get caught in that thought because you basically trust it and buddy up to it. And, you know.
And what happens when we think the problem is, let's say we think the problem is our partner, because of the natural creative intelligence that we have, one, we're going to see everything that's wrong with our partner and get really good at seeing that. And two, we're going to try and solve for those problems that aren't really the issue that's creating the pain in our life. And we can, I will admit, I was really good at doing that and spent a long time trying to change Angus, dragging you to workshops, thinking that was going to be the answer, and looking at ways that I could help you be different. And all that did was really damage the rapport and goodwill in our relationship. Me thinking the problem was him had him feel unappreciated, had him feel criticized, and the resentment built up. And it's not like he wasn't doing the same thing with me. He just didn't have such a vengeance about it. I think I just had a lot more willpower and stamina to put behind it.
I wasn't in such a rush as you were.
You were like, life's pretty good. I don't know what your problem is. You're not perfect, but you know what you'll do. Sometimes you just get really annoying, but oh well.
So true.
Thank you for staying with me.
That's great. That's great.
Yeah, no, this is I think the journey that you've been on, apart from anything else, it's like I think there's so few people out there who've spent their whole adult life, you know, and I know you've been around a little bit now. It's like, I don't want to ask you how old you are, obviously.
Well, I'm happy to say.
But how incredible that, you know, you learned from, you know, that list of people that you said that you were able to sit in on, and for spending your whole adult life teaching this understanding. I mean, that puts you in such a unique position. In my mind, you're one of the best teachers that's out there, and I understand, and I know I'm not alone in that feeling. So you've seen how this understanding, you've seen how state of mind is just now for you. It's just so obvious. Like for what you're saying, and for me being relatively new to this understanding, I do come up against that sort of point where people are, maybe they've had an insight, or maybe they have maybe they kind of understand it, but more of an intellectual way. So we probably use, I don't know, those sort of cliche terms like, well, you have a check engine light that comes on. It's kind of like, you've got to be more hip to your feelings. It's like it's telling you something. It's an indicator. But it's kind of, in the moment, it's kind of really hard to discern, like, well, what is my indicator here? What is it telling me? Or to even, how do you get hip to that? And there are times when I feel like, and I've said this before, it's almost like I'll have a moment where I know that I'm caught up, but then maybe it's my ego. It's almost like it's got a whole legal team working on the small print, trying to figure out how it's going to support the fact that, yeah, it's absolutely her problem.
Yeah.
so don't see it any other way. Come on. And so it's kind of like you're up against your old programming and conditioning. And so it's hard for people in the moment when they're experiencing that flood of emotions, that jet fuel is coursing through their system, that flight or flight, whatever it is kind of like, yeah, I do feel like my ego is like, yeah, you know what? It's like, okay, this is one of those situations where this doesn't hold any water.
Yeah.
So and I love the fact that you have such amazing grounding that now it's just like so sort of blatantly obvious to you. It's becoming more obvious to me, but it's like it's really interesting to sort of be with a client or be with a resident at the treatment center and sort of trying to sort of help them understand. It's like, yeah, it is about awareness. It's not something that you get to put in a tool belt here. And I think that just for me is still, that's the exploration.
Yeah. Well, this will, I don't want to ruin your image of me, but but me too. That's the interesting thing that's really surprising. It's like thought is so all-encompassing. It's so visceral. It's so physical. It's so emotional. It's so perceptual. It's so instantaneous. That I run with it. I run with it too. And the thing is, I've noticed the difference between people that have been involved in this a long time and a short time is people that have been involved in a short time think they're going to beat the system.
That's so funny.
They're all like, yeah, I'm almost there. One day, woo! And then when they think like, yeah, 6 months, I'm doing great, and then they get carried away in a thought, they get really down about it. Oh man, I was almost batting 1,000 there. What's wrong with me? And if you listen to people that are involved more, they're like, oh yeah, that happens. Oh yeah, that happens. Yeah, I get totally lost. Yeah, check this out. Like I could tell you stories from the past year, like Leela and I properly fell out with each other for a good few weeks, and I was utterly committed to my resentment around how unfair it was, and she was utterly committed to her resentment about whatever bogus thing she was worried about. And we would not come out of our corners, and it was hellish. It was hellish. And that it's almost like if you approach that with understanding, call it what it is, label it what it is, just stick the label on it. Oh, thought. Oh, commitment to thought. Oh, righteousness about thought. Oh, you don't have to do anything because there's nothing you can do, but it's just being willing to let yourself consider what it really is. And as a result, the implication is what it really not.
Yeah.
And that's all you need. And because you can't eliminate thought and you can't control thought, but because it is thought, it doesn't matter the way we feel, it matters. So if you talk to, we're exactly the same, and we're all kind of helping ourselves reveal what's really happening that's not as bad and serious as we think. And it's just going back to, oh, okay, I've got these 3 labels, mind, consciousness, and thought. It should go on everything. Where does it go here? Oh, no, it doesn't go there. This is a workplace conflict where maybe they have thought. Yeah, it's their bogus thought. Well, do you have thought? Yeah, I must do. Yeah. And as you do that, you get oriented, and you can still be utterly pissed, but it's just not the same.
Yeah. And there's a relaxation that happens in that when we realize we can't beat the system. Like, I loved realizing that. It's like, oh my goodness, I don't have to keep working at trying to beat the system. This is great. This is just what it is. I'm going to get crazy all my life, and I can be okay with that. All right, I can sign up for that.
Yeah, I absolutely love that. I think that's going to be so helpful when I do get caught up and think you're being tremendously annoying. Hopefully at some point I'll be telling myself, you're just trying to beat the system here.
That's great.
It's nothing to do with Rohini.
Yeah, that's right.
That's going to be helpful. Maybe that is finally a tool, that I can put in my tool belt.
Yeah, you can't beat the system. It reminds me of, do you ever see that movie Liar Liar?
Yeah,
with that Jim Carrey? Yeah.
I love that. It might be my favorite movie of all time. But he can't lie, and he wants to get the court case postponed. So he goes into the bathroom and he just beats himself up because he's going to go out and tell them, look, a crazy man in the bathroom beat me up, which is actually true. And so he's just throwing himself against the radiator, and he's banging his head in the toilet, and he's really beating himself up. And this guy comes in and he looks really at him, and he turns around and he's got blood on him and tissue. I'm kicking my ass. Do you mind? And that's how I feel. I feel like I'm kicking my ass. Do you mind?
Yeah. It's so true.
Yeah.
And I like to think that I sort of kind of have crossed that threshold, because I think when I first learned this understanding, and I probably was one of those people thinking that I can beat the system. And then there would be those moments where I'd get upset with you, and I would fester in that experience of upset for probably a long period of time. And then I would totally beat myself up for the fact that, oh, this is just yet another thing that I've learned that doesn't work. And obviously, I need to go and figure out or learn something else, some other new philosophy. And then now I just sort of like, what I love now is I do have those moments, and it happens quite often. If I do get upset with you, there reaches a point where I'm just realizing it. It's like, oh yeah, you know what? In a sense, it's like I am trying to beat the system. I kind of know what's happening. And then it kind of all seems comical. It does seem like Jim Carrey beating himself up in the bathroom. And then I kind of see the humor in it. And it's kind of fun to sort of get to that point where 1 minute I'm like this sort of rabid beast ready to sort of really take you down. And the next is like, well, this is just pure comedic gold.
It's such a good example. And then it's really helpful to be like, oh, do I see the lightness in it or not? Oh, I must be totally on a tear then.
That's right. Yeah.
This doesn't look funny. I must be on a tear. No, but then that doesn't always occur to you. So you kind of like, we're all in the thick of it.
Yeah. And I think it's also reassuring that we all still get caught up in thought. And yet looking at my life, what I do see has made such a tremendous difference. Like I don't need to not ever be getting caught up in thought in order to have a pretty amazing life compared to the life that I was living before. And that was because my internal life was just very dire in the way that I was caught up in all of those misunderstandings in my consciousness about who I am, what I needed. And fundamentally, if I drill down, it was just a misunderstanding about where my well-being came from. I thought it came from outside of me. I didn't realize that it has been there all along. And I don't need to feel it now all the time in order to be okay. I don't need to be on a quest to always be feeling happy. I can be okay with the vagaries of my human experience and still know that fundamentally I'm okay. And that's really liberating.
Yeah, it really is. It really is. It really is. Yeah.
And the other thing I wanted to mention, because I'm imagining people listening to this might underestimate. I know certain of my clients underestimate this, but when there isn't a technique, when there isn't a strategy that we're giving people, and it is really simply understanding where their experience comes from and the role that their state of mind and thought plays in that, and that they have this access to this spiritual essence of who they are, like simply understanding that is enough to have a significant impact on interrupting those identifications with conditioned thought. Like that's it. It's simply seeing that. And I think people find that hard to believe, because often I get asked the question, well, how do I do that then? Like I hear what you're saying, and they're getting it on an intellectual level. Like, yeah, I get that my experience is coming from my thought, but how do I stop these thoughts? And I'm like, it's not, you don't need to stop the thoughts.
Yeah.
You just don't need to buy into them so much.
Yeah. It's true. It's
Yeah.
true. I mean, I think I totally agree with you. It's like people want to do something with thought because they've already given it a lot of credence. So they're suffering the credence that they gave the thought. Like, for example, let's say you think, oh, I'm no good at this. And then because you have that feeling, you think, oh, I must be no good at it. And you're like, well, I got to get rid of this thought because I feel rotten. But the fact that you feel rotten means you treated the thought like it was a reality.
Yeah.
And that's the only thing that makes a difference. Trying to ignore a thought that you believe in is a complete waste of time. It's utterly impossible. And even if you do manage to get it out of your head, you believed it already. So it's already had its way with you. It's already affected. So it really is such a false idea that doing something with the thought will help you, because it's the way you listen to the thought that affects you. I mean, we have thousands of thoughts that we think are stupid or funny, or like I was standing around the water cooler at work one day, and someone came in and they said, oh my God, I had the most disturbing experience on the weekend. I was driving along the scenic drive, and this scenic drive goes along a mountainside, kind of hillside. And I had the thought, what would happen if I veered off? I think there's something wrong with me. Am I going to kill myself? So one of the people sitting at one of the desks says, oh yeah, I have that thought too. I think it's really funny. And then someone else says, yeah, I have that thought too, but I figured it doesn't really mean anything. And you realize, oh, it's not the thought. The thought doesn't do anything. It just features on your screen at some point, and then and in your senses. And then it's how we take that, how we relate to it, which comes down to what you think it really is. Do you think it's an insight? Do you think it's a window on reality? Do you think it's made up? That's what matters. That's what makes the difference. But we live in a world that treats thought like it's an independent object. So, you know, you got to get it away from you and you'll be all right.
Good luck with that, right?
Yeah, seriously. Yeah.
You know, it's funny. So it's funny you should say that, because that was one of my buts around this understanding, is that I had this tremendous fear of heights. And that was the issue for me. I would be on the side of a mountain, and, you know, coming to the States, and there are proper mountains here with no barriers on the side of the road, and pretty friggin' high up. And I would have that thought that I'm going to drive over the edge. And it was just impossible to get that out of my mind until I really learned this understanding and realized, oh, I don't really have to take that seriously. Actually, I don't even have to hop on board that train of thoughts. And then I had an entirely different experience. And that was ultimately a defining moment for me to realize that I actually can apply this to anything. Even if I'm pissed off at Rohini, actually, I don't have to hop on board that train of thought. And that's what got me through. And there was another point around heights, I think, when I learned this understanding, where I thought that I kind of like, you know, I can see it's my thinking, I've got this now. And then I think we were in Sri Lanka on that sort of very sort of like, I guess you would call it a mountain, of a sort of rickety fire escape that sort of went to the top of it. And I'm thinking, oh, it's just my thinking. And I was purposefully trying to sort of like substitute that thought for a more positive one. And it just did not work at all. And it was me trying to sort of manage my thinking. And a lot of people, I think, that, oh, if I'm having bad thinking, I need to sort of substitute it. I need to manage it. I need to control it. And for me, that's my greatest reference point. Oh, it's just awareness. I don't have to take that seriously. And I don't even need to give it any, I don't even need to throw any oxygen at it. I just can kind of leave it alone. I think it's maybe sometimes it's hard to leave it alone, but I certainly don't need to give it the value that I once gave it. And that's been huge.
And you had a lovely Sri Lankan gentleman hold your hand up the mountain.
That's right. He put his hand on my shoulders. I thought he was like this sort of saintly altruist, and at the top of the mountain, he's like trying to extort all this money out of me.
Well, he had helped you.
He did help me, yeah. But I did give him some money, but I didn't give him enough in his estimation.
I could have held your hand, though.
You could have done. But it did the trick.
You obviously weren't the only one having that experience.
Right.
So Aaron, we have some just personal questions that we ask people that are in relationship to just kind of see the human side of relationship. Are you open to us playing with you on that level?
Yeah,
okay.
Totally.
And if you don't want to answer any of them, just say, hey, skip that one. But the first one is, what's one of your fondest memories in your relationship? And this is kind of improv. It's like whatever comes to mind.
Don't have any thinking on it. Don't put any thinking on it.
Oh no, it's funny because when Leela and I first got together, we kind of really just clicked. It was before I knew much about the principles. Maybe this was after I'd started learning about them, because that's what allowed our relationship to break out of the normal pattern of my relationships, and also hers as well. But I remember her parents had a farm in Wales, which I thought was awesome because it was in its countryside. It was just gorgeous. And I remember we were down there and we went for a walk across the fields, and we just sat down in the corner of this field, and she was sat behind me and I was leaning on her, and I had a piece of grass in my hand, and it was just bliss, just utter bliss. And it was so rich, like it really blew me away. It really, there was such a rich experience of bliss and, I don't know, quiet meaningfulness. And nothing was happening. And yeah, even now it's like, oh yeah, that's a no-brainer that time.
That's beautiful. Love that.
What is one of the funniest memories in your relationship?
One of the funniest memories in our relationship? I don't know. Now I'm trying to think of it. I haven't. I never have funny in our relationship.
I'm sure you have funny on an hourly basis in your household.
That's just the norm. That's why nothing's standing out. Right. You're in the bathroom beating yourself up like Jim Carrey.
Let me see if I think of anything as we go on.
Hey, that's fine. We'll put that one on the back burner. How do you divide domestic labor in your relationship?
Oh, well, this is easy. We used to divide. I don't know how we used to divide it, but there was a lot of misgivings the way we used to divide it. That Leela was doing too much tidying up. I wasn't doing enough tidying up. So we used to try and divide it based on our gripes. So whoever was upset was apportioning domestic tasks to someone else.
Oh, really? Wow, that's a good methodology.
Yeah,
I like that.
So now we just do it based on, I guess, what people are into. So a couple of years ago, Leela realized she hates cooking, and because she hates cooking, nobody really likes it when she cooks. And so I started cooking. So I pretty much do all the cooking. We both do almost everything, but there are things that Leela does a lot more of because she's more proactive. Like she kind of on it a lot more, like washing. I do a lot more keeping things, like I kind of do a lot more keeping things tidier and be a bit more proactive on that, which coming into the relationship was not in my world at all. I'm kind of proud of myself that I kind of find that easy now. And then parenting, I think we kind of, it's quite fluid. I think we, zone in and out depending on what seems most appropriate. And then sometimes we get all het up about it and we get at odds about it, you know.
Mm-hmm. I know Angus and I, with parenting, we try to have the sanest person talk to the kids.
Yeah, that is a good plan.
Sometimes they go weeks without any human contact. Right?
No, it's all relative. Or are you guys arguing about it? I'm the sanest. No, I'm the sanest.
That's right.
I've had that conversation. Angus is like, I think you're really angry, Rohini. I'm not angry. This is how it needs to be done. I'm really clear.
No, but the parenting's interesting because it really shows you there's those dual impulses. There's the logic of wisdom and a quieter mind, which is very feelingful and rich and connected. And there's a real impetus in that. And then there's that other impetus of like intensity and reactivity. And in a way, that's all there is. And it's funny how parenting is a really good example of how each one works better. Like one ruins everything and one really helps everything. But it's like, you think there's a pattern to this? I don't know, just carry on.
It's amazing how we could be slow learners in that area.
No, seriously.
And how we can lie to ourselves like that. Like, no, I'm in a good feeling. I can talk to her about it. I should be the one. Like, I don't think so.
All right, let's see.
This is a pretty good feeling compared to what they did.
How are finances handled in your relationship, if you don't mind me asking?
That's very British of you.
Yeah, I do. Well, I do actually. It was a very inappropriate question.
We're not asking for specifics, Aaron, just so you know.
No, it's funny because we've never really had any issues with finance. So ever since we started living together, which was kind of about a year after we got together, we've always had one bank account. We've always just considered it one pool of money. Sometimes one of us works more than the other. Sometimes someone isn't working. So Leela worked while I did a PhD. I worked when we were in Lakona. It's just one of those areas where we've never really had any thinking about it. Mm-hmm. You know, and there are disparities, like there's disparities in earning, there's disparities in spending, but it's generally a non-issue. It's kind of like Team Turner ingoings and outgoings kind of thing.
Mm-hmm. That's great.
That's
Love
awesome.
That. Yeah. So what would you say is the biggest misunderstanding that you woke up from in relationship?
Let me think about this. So I think the biggest misunderstanding that I woke up in relationship, that there's probably 4 or 5, but the biggest one was about contentment and well-being. That was the biggest one. And there were 2 parts to it. One is, if I don't feel contentment and well-being, the problem's in my head, not anywhere else. I mean, that was an utter game changer, Like realizing that there are times where my mind is not on my side and there's a telltale sign. So, you know, don't eat the yellow snow. Well, don't listen to the gripey thinking. And that was an absolute game changer. But linked to that is our well-being is an experience of our own mind, of our own essence. So there is no situation in which I can't have well-being by having a lighter relationship to my own distressed thinking. And there's a way in which in relationships, all areas of life, but people get really bogged down in the relationship one, because when you feel bad, someone else is doing something. So you can get really caught thinking, I couldn't feel good until they stop it. Mm-hmm. And just that idea, it's not even just the idea, oh, I can set myself free from my suffering and I'll know when I have, because I'll feel fantastic. Not I'll feel better considering, I'll feel fantastic. Yeah. So if Leela's really upset, really vindictive, really aggressive, doesn't want to talk to me, that's got nothing to do with me feeling really good. Mm-hmm. And it's not ignoring her, it's not ignoring the situation, it's just being willing to see, oh, I'm hanging on to thought that's stopping me from having a freer mind. And that was amazing, because it meant my experience of Leela and my well-being and my relationship had nothing to do with her. It wasn't held back by her, it wasn't conditional on her. And you hear people say that a lot. Oh, well, you know, I'm looking, obviously you have to have a relationship with someone that understands the principles. Well, Leela wasn't into the principles for a very long time. And I knew I could have a great relationship if I was willing to not wallow in my own thinking.
Yeah.
That is amazing.
It
And
is.
I knew it was true because I held myself to that standard, and I discovered, oh my God, it's true. Oh my God, it's true. And once you know it's true, then it's not a theory and there's nothing to argue about. It's like, yeah, you know it's true. So, so stop, you know, whatever. Yeah, that's, I think, the biggest.
I love that. It's so powerful.
Yeah, that's going on the sizzle reel.
So if there was only one thing you could say to Leela, what would you want to say to her?
Oh, I love her so much. And I feel I've been very lucky that we were able to meet in this life and understand enough to be able to appreciate and enjoy each other's company.
That's beautiful. That is a lovely note to end on.
Definitely.
Yeah. Thank you, Aaron. We'll let you jump off, but thank you so much. So enjoy speaking with you, and really look forward to listening back to this one.
Yeah, thanks, Aaron. I feel blessed, and it's a privilege to be able to talk to you always. Thank you so much.
Thank you for having me. It was a real fun. It was a pleasure. Thank you.
Yeah.
Excellent.
Take care.
Take care.